Greetings, Planeswalkers. So today, I decided to share a bit of my deck teching, what I've done with some of the cards that I've acquired over the years. So, talking EDH, today we're going to talk about Rashmi Eternities Crafter. That is the commander I went for with this deck. Now, Rashmi is a 4 CMC, that's 2 generic, a blue and a green, for a legendary creature elf druid from the Aether Revolt set. And she says, whenever you cast your first spell each turn, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a non-land card with converted mana cost less than that spell's, you may cast without paying its mana cost. If you don't cast a revealed card, put it into your hand. She's a 2/3, which I don't really deal with because this deck, or at least this particular build, is not combat focused, but maybe you are. Anywho, basically what her ability says is, obviously you can't use the turn you cast her because she'd be your first spell or whatever. But every turn thereafter, and it says of each turn, not your turn. So what makes her really good is she triggers whenever you cast a spell on each player. So let's say it's a 4-person game, you cast her on your turn. Your next opponent goes. During their turn, you cast one of your own spells. Well, that's your first spell of that turn. So she would trigger. And what her ability basically boils down to is, you cast a spell, reveal the top card. If it's cheaper, you cast it. So let's say you decide to cast, I don't know, let's go with Force of Will to counter one of your opponent's spells. You put, basically, they cast their spell, you cast Force of Will targeting theirs. Rashmi's ability then goes on the stack. Now, it doesn't matter what happens to Force of Will after that, because her ability is always triggered, so it's going to remember that as the spell exists on the stack. Now, it says the spell's mana cost, not converted mana cost. And that can be important if you're casting, like, let's say, an X spell. But anyway, come back to the scenario. So you cast your Force of Will, Rashmi's trigger goes on the stack. As it's resolving, you reveal the top card of your library. The converted mana cost of that spell has to be less than, or that card has to be less than the spell you're casting. So in the example given with Force of Will, the card you reveal, if you want to cast it, has to be CMC 4 or less. Now, it's also important that it says you may cast it without paying its mana cost. So let's say you cast Force of Will, counter your opponent's spell, and the top card of your library is, let's say, Blue Sun Zenith or Genesis Wave. Because those are both X spells, and they're not going to do anything for you with X being 0, then you're going to not want to cast them and put them into your hand. However, if it's something good, like let's say Beast Within, or, Wrath of God or something, you can cast that for free. And that's kind of what I decided to build this deck around, was just taking full advantage of her ability to just dump spells for free, throw a bunch of cards in my hand. Just take full advantage of what her ability has to offer. So, let's get into the nitty-gritty of the deck. Let's start with artifacts. For my first artifacts, we have Alhammart's Archive. That's 4 generic for a legendary artifact. If you would gain life, you gain twice that much life instead. If you would draw a card, except the first one you draw on each of your draw steps, draw 2 cards instead. Now, I don't really care much about the life gain in this deck. I do have decks that do, and it's also in those decks, but that's beside the point right now. What I care about is the second part. If you would draw a card, except for the first one you draw on each of your draw steps. So, if you draw a card anywhere else, this triggers. And if your draw step has you drawing multiple cards, this is going to trigger. And it triggers for each of those. Or sorry, not triggers, it's a replacement effect, if instead replacement. So it's just a thing that happens. So, let's say your opponent Arcane Denials one of your spells. Now, Arcane Denial has a delayed trigger. At the beginning of the next upkeep, you may draw up to 2 cards. So, on that, you can choose to draw 0, 1, or 2. If you choose to draw 0, then you don't draw anything. Nothing happens. If you choose to draw 1, Alhammart's Archive is going to replace that, and you draw 2 instead. And if you choose to draw both of the cards off Denial, it's going to replace both of those draws and give you 4 cards. So you kind of got to be a little careful with that, because you can draw a lot more cards than you realize, and next thing you know, you have like 5 cards in your deck, and you end up decking yourself out for a loss. Or a win if that's your intent. But I just threw it in there because it's pretty handy for that, especially for a deck that I'm trying to draw a lot of cards. My next artifact is Sensei's Divining Top. That's 1 generic for an artifact. Now, it has two separate abilities. You pay 1 generic mana, look at the top 3 cards of your library, then put them back in any order. So kind of like a pseudo Scry 3, which is really powerful, especially with Rashmi's trigger, but I'll get into all the combos and interactions later. I just want to go over the deck list. Second ability, tap, draw a card, then put Sensitive Divine on top of its owner's library. So you got to look very carefully there. If you notice, the only cost to this is tap. So you can tap it to put that trigger on the stack, and with that trigger on the stack, you can then pay 1 to look at the top 3 and rearrange them, and then draw your top 1. Or you pay the 1, and then you tap it, and then you can draw a card, and then put Sensei's top in, and that'll be one of the 3 that you rearrange. Or you can, do it another way where you look at the top 3, you tap it to draw a card, and then you shuffle it into those 3. You just gotta be careful how you layer those triggers, especially depending on how your play group is. With my group, we're pretty casual. I just say, hey, I'm doing this. I'm going to layer these in such a way that I'm going to draw a card and then look at my top 3. However, you just got to make sure that you understand how it works. That way, if someone tries to call you out on it, you can explain how this works. My next artifact is Civic Signet. 2 mana for an artifact, a mana rock, basically. You pay 1 generic and tap it. You add blue-green to your mana pool. Now, I like the Signets because they're low cost. You can get them out fairly quickly. And I prefer those over like the Key Runes or the Clue Stones. Because although the Clue Stones have the added ability of letting you draw a card, I just like the Signet for speed. So since Rashmi is a 4-drop, turn 1, ideally it would go turn 1 land into a Soul Ring into the Signet. Turn 2, drop another land. Or even if I miss that land drop, I can still use the Soul Ring, the Signet, and the land to cast Rashmi on turn 2. So I can generally do that fairly frequently. It's not ideal. Typically I get her out turn 3 or 4. But it's just nice to have the capability of being able to throw her out on turn 2 and have her. The more triggers you get off of her, the better she is. Pretty simple, self-explanatory. Next is Soul Ring. Commander staple. Some playgroups don't use it. I have yet to meet one of those playgroups, but pretty much a commander staple. 1 drop, put 2 in your mana pool. If you can, why wouldn't you? It's a very polarizing card, but we're not here to talk about that. My next artifact is Thought Vessel. 2 mana for another artifact. You have no maximum hand size, which is really handy when you're drawing a lot of cards or putting a lot of cards in your hand. You want to keep those cards. You really don't want to just have to decide which you want most and chuck the rest away. I have a few ways of doing that in this deck. I don't like discarding cards. I really don't. See, in some of my other decks, if I get around to those, I don't really have a whole lot of discard for me. A lot of stuff that, if I have a lot of draw, I'm going to have ways to keep those cards. And it has the added benefit of it's another mana rock. You can tap it to add 1 generic mana to your mana pool. Or I think you got Errata to be colorless. Either way. So it's just one more way of getting more mana to cast bigger spells later or more spells later. And the last artifact I'm going to talk about is Vidalcan Orrery. This is a 4-drop. You may play non-land cards anytime you could play an instant. So essentially what this does is it gives all my stuff flash. So let's say I have a sorcery or something that I don't really want to use on my turn because I don't really sure the benefits. Or I just want to hold off to get a trigger on Rashmi later on. This really helps with that. Also, if I'm drawing a lot of cards during other players' turns, I want to be able to use those cards when I want to, not just when the game tells me I can. So this is just another way to get stuff out faster, easier, and still be able to do what I want on my turn. Now we're going to talk about creatures. My first one is Altered Ego. X2 blue green. So it's EMC of 4 for a 0/0 creature shapeshifter. Now, I like that it can't be countered, because when your stuff gets countered, it's just like, ah, and it's really disappointing. But Altered Ego can't be countered. There are a couple ways around that, but we'll get to those later. And it also has the added benefit of, you may have Altered Ego enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield that's tipped and enters with X additional 1/1 counters on it. And I really like that, because you can cast it for 4 to get a clone of whatever the hell you feel like. And then, if you have more mana, you can make it bigger. I've used this to copy people's, like somebody's Avacyn, Angel of Hope. But I paid like 3 extra mana, so instead of an 8/8, I have an 11/11 indestructible. So it's just really good value. Early game you get a clone, late game you get a big clone. And also, because it's an X spell, the more mana I use to cast it, the wider range of stuff I can catch with a Rashmi trigger. Now we're gonna move on to Azami Lady of Scrolls. 2 triple blue for a legendary creature, human wizard, 0/2. Tap and untap wizard you control. Draw a card. She is handy because she lets me draw. Like, a lot. And the benefit is, although she's a 0/2, hers is not an ability. Her ability doesn't have the tap symbol in its mana cost, or in the cost of it. It just says tap and untap wizard. She's a wizard. Now, because it doesn't have the tap symbol, I can do it at instant speed anytime I want, including when I first play her. Because it does not, so many sectors does not apply if the tap symbol is not present. And if I have ways of untapping them, even better. So she's just a really good draw engine, and if I absolutely need to, chump block her. Next, we move on to Baral, Chief of Compliance, 1 in the blue for a legendary creature, human wizard. Instant and sorcery spells. Oh, sorry, he's a 1/3. So he can be a decent chump blocker. He's not really going to do much attacking, but that's not really what this deck is about. But he has a big butt. Makes him a little bit harder to kill. Yeah, he's susceptible to like lightning bolt and stuff, but he's 2 mana. So it's not that big of a loss. And he makes your instant and sorcery spells cost 1 less to cast. Which means, and that applies not just to its CMC, but that's the spell's mana cost. So let's say I have, let's use the previous example, Genesis Wave, right? And I have 3 green mana and 3 blue mana in my mana pool with him on the board. Now normally, with that setup, you could only cast Genesis Wave for 3. The 3 green, and then X would be 3 for the 3 blue. However, since Baral makes it cost 1 less to cast, you can declare X is 4. And he reduces the cost down to 3, so you only have to pay 6 mana instead of 7. So he just kind of helps me cast more stuff, some stuff sooner than I'd be able to. Plus, since I'm running blue, I'm running counter spells. So whenever a spell or ability you control counters a spell, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. Like I said, I don't like discarding cards. So unless I have cards in my hand that I don't really want to have at that point, I want to try something better, I typically won't use his ability. There are a couple times I will, but it's more I can filter if I need to. It's just another ability that's nice to have. Next on my list is Birds of Paradise. It's a single green for a creature, bird, 0/1. It has flying, which I don't really care about. I mean, yeah, decent jump blocker in the air if I need it. I'm more concerned about the tap, add 1 mana of any color of your choice to your mana pool. Again, I like fixing my colors. I like getting mana quickly. So, Birds makes that doable. I can more consistently drop my commander earlier. It's just another way to do that. That's pretty much all it is. Edric, Spymaster of Trest, is a 1 blue-green for a 2/2 legendary creature, elf rogue. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller may draw a card. Now, if you're familiar with Commander, you know that it's a very political game. Edric is a political card. I threw him in there too on those few occasions when I can get in a swing or two. I get to draw extra cards. It's more for, hey, you come at me, you don't get to draw. Or as I like to phrase it when we're playing, he lets you draw a card when you deal damage to not me. And that's pretty much what I have him in here for, is A, ignore me, you hit other people, you get to draw. Which is nice, right? Everyone likes drawing cards. So it's kind of a pillow 40 type thing. But it all depends on how much hate you're drawing. Next up, Jin Gitaxias, Core Augur. Now, the Praetors, I'm very careful how I play them, because they're kind of mean cards. Mean being a very light way of putting it. So Jin Gitaxias, he's 8 double blue for a 5/4 legendary creature Praetor. Flash, so you can cast him at any time, even without the Orrery. At the beginning of your end step, draw 7 cards. I like drawing cards. This is blue. More cards, more power. Just do stuff. Each opponent's maximum hand size is reduced by 7. Now, notice how it does not say is reduced to 0 or becomes 0. It just says it's reduced by 7. There are a few cards out there that increase your maximum hand size by like 1 or 2. There's only a handful of them. No one really plays them. However, this really comes into play when your opponents don't have something like Thought Vessel. If they don't have a you have no max hand size card, their hand size is effectively 0. So, at each opponent's end step, they're discarding whatever they have in their hand. And the flash is handy because let's say you have an opponent that's trying to do the same thing you are, draw a crap load of cards. Well, at their end step, you flash in Jingataxius, so when it goes to the cleanup step, they have to discard all those cards they just drew. You do have to be careful, though, because if you're not playing quickly, you can deck yourself. Like, let's say an opponent mills that one card you needed to prevent that. It can get dangerous. So you got to be careful how you play him. Plus, he draws a lot of hate. People don't like having no hand. Next on my list is Laboratory Maniac, 2 and a blue for a creature human wizard. Again, coming back to that wizard thing with Azami. 2/2. If you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game instead. Like I said, this is blue. I love drawing cards. I have played against a couple mill decks with this. Just kept Lab Maniac in my hand. They mill me down to a couple cards. I flash them in with like the Orrery on one of their mill triggers. I run out of cards, and I cast a draw spell. And then I win. So, but you do got to be careful with him, because if you play him too soon, people will be like, oh, I see what you're doing, and then they'll like path to exile him or something. You know, just kind of that permanent removal. And then you have to find another way to do things. So he is just one win condition in this deck, but he's cheap. I mean, he's really easy to get out, and I have a bunch of ways to go get him, so why not, right? Next up, Lighthouse Chronologist. One of the more powerful gameplay, I guess, mechanics is extra turns. Because it allows you to do stuff on, let's say you're taking 2 extra turns, right? That first turn, you might do some stuff that you would have been hesitant to. Like, oh, you know, I got this really big spell I want to cast, but it would make me tap out. So, if you have an extra turn after this, you know that your opponents aren't going to be able to come at you. So you can tap out, cast that big spell, do what you're going to do, and then you end your turn, you start another turn. So you untap everything, and then you can just go about what you normally would have done. But you do got to be a little prepared for this guy. So he's 1 in the blue for a creature human wizard, starts off as a 1/3. Now he has a little bit older mechanic called level up. So you pay his level up cost, you put a level counter on him. You do it as a sorcery. Level 1 through 3, he's just a 1/3, nothing special about it. As soon as you hit level 4, he becomes a 2/4, so he gets a little bit of a buff, and that buff stays for levels 5 and 6. Now, as soon as you level him up to level 7 or higher, which you can if you want to, let's say your opponent removes some counters from him, or you don't prepare for that, or whatever. He's a 3/5, and at the beginning of each end step, if it's not your turn, take an extra turn after this one. Now, this right here is dangerous. You got to be able to level him up quick, and hopefully have some ways to protect him, unless you want him out there as, hey, draw hate to this guy, ignore this other guy. But I mean, if he lives, extra turns, especially in a multiplayer game, can get ridiculous. And I mean ridiculous. I've played a couple games where me and the opponent each had a max-level Lighthouse Chronologist. And at that point, the other 2 players, they should have just scooped. I don't know why they didn't. Because literally it was just me and the other player going back and forth. Because at each of our end steps, our opponents, or the other guy's Lighthouse, would trigger. So if you don't have one, you don't get a turn. That's essentially how that goes, if there's more than one leveled up all the way. And extra turns are really nice, as I said before. So that's just kind of why he's in here. It's just another way to do what I want to do. Moving on to Magus of the Future. 2 triple blue for a 2/3 creature human wizard. Play with the top card of your library revealed. You may play the top card of your library. Now, it does not say cast. That's important, because if the top card of your library is a land, and you haven't played your land yet per turn, you can do that. And then you can also cast cards from your library, paying their mana cost, obviously. Playing on the top card of your library revealed is a bit of a drawback because people see what's coming. But you can use like Sensei's Top to kind of rearrange that, keep people guessing. Or with a crap load of draw cards, and it doesn't really matter what the top card of your library is. I like to play the top card of your library. That's what I like about him. It's just one more way to get to the spells that I want when I need them. So this is a very utilitarian card. Next up is Psychosis Crawler. 5 mana for an artifact creature, horror, star. Psychosis Crawler's power and toughness are each equal to the number of cards in your hand. Now this applies in any zone of the game. Because it just says are equal to. So that's a static ability if he's in your library versus in the exile zone even, that applies. So if you have 2 cards in your hand, he's a 2/2 in whatever zone he's in. And then whenever you draw a card, each opponent loses 1 life. I like this for multiple reasons. First off being, I'm already drawing a lot of cards in this deck. So, may as well do something with all those cards that I don't have to pay for. So whenever I draw a card, hey, everyone lose a life. Pair that with some other cards, and you can get really heavy really quick. And it's also important to note that it says loses 1 life. So damage reduction effects don't do anything to this card. On the flip side of that, damage enhancing effects don't do anything to it either, but I'll take that trade-off. It's lost a life. There really isn't much your opponents can do about that except remove him. But they usually target him and not you, because as an artifact creature, he's fairly vulnerable. But for 5 mana and you start doing stuff, I like it. I like it a lot. Sakashima the Imposter is 2 double blue for a 3/1 legendary creature human rogue. Now, there's a wall of text. I'll boil it down. You can go ahead and read it if you want. I'm going to boil it down. Basically, Sakashima clone enters the battlefield as a clone, or whatever you want. The important part, though, is that Sakashima retains its name. It also retains its legendary status, which, man, whatever. And it gains the ability to double blue, return Sakashima the Imposter to its owner's hand at end of turn. Now, I usually forget about that. I don't really use it that much because delayed evasion like that, it's good if you're trying to copy multiple stuff, all around the board, try to get that utilitarian use out of him. I mean, that's how you want to play. I like that it comes in as a copy of any creature, but keeps its name, which means I can copy legendary stuff that I control. And what's a good legendary creature that I control? Rashmi Eternities Crafter. I now have 2 Rashmis, which means every turn, my first spell gets a double trigger. And it can get out of hand quickly. When you're essentially, even just casting 1 spell, you're essentially drawing 3 cards a turn. And if you can cast them on your opponent's turn, you get even more. So it can get out of hand pretty quickly, and it's very cheaply costed. And if you don't control anything, you can see something out there right now to chump block or whatever. You can have Sakashima come in as a 3/1. Not bad, pretty small behind. But, not a bad fist. So, there is that as an option. Seedborn Muse is 3 double green for a 2/4 creature spirit. Now, if you've been playing Commander for any length of time, you know about Prophet of Krufix and how ridiculously broken Prophet was. Well, Seedborn is half of Prophet on a stick. Untap all permanents you control during each other player's untap step. Oh my god. I'm honestly surprised Seedborn hasn't been banned for a similar reason to Prophet. It is, I think, the more powerful version of, or more powerful half of Prophet's ability. There are a bunch of ways to give stuff flash, but the untapping permanents you control, like every permanent, lands, creatures, artifacts, whatever, and tap and freeze effects don't affect it. Like if someone plays a card that says, tap, whatever, it doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. Well, that only applies to your untap step. You're untapping it during everyone else's untap step as well, so it can get out of hand pretty quickly, especially when you're running a lot of instants, or the ability to play stuff at instant speed, because every turn you're just dropping stuff and you're just getting out of control really quickly. So I'd say it's well worth the mana and the money to get this thing. Just insane green card. Solemn Simulacrum is 4 for a 2/2 artifact creature golem. Long story short, when it ETBs, go get a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped. When it dies, draw a card. It's a really good chump blocker. It's a really good way to fix your mana. It's a really good way to help thin your deck. I like it a lot. I mean, I don't really know what more I could say about it. It's almost a staple, pretty much. Let's move on to Talran Sky Summoner, 2 double blue for a 2/2 legendary creature Merfolk Wizard. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, put a 2/2 blue Drake with flying onto the battlefield. Really good way to chump block if your opponent's running an air-heavy deck, or you want to get over people's heads for some damage, or you're running like a token deck. If you have a lot of instants and sorceries, and you're running blue, he's a good add-in, because it's just free tokens for doing what you were going to do anyway. Yeah, he doesn't scale with the power of this instant or sorcery, like as far as mana-wise, but I mean, you can get a 2/2 Drake for playing a 1-drop. Pretty good, I'd say. And last creature on my list is Vorinclex Voice of Hunger. 6 double green for a 7/6 legendary creature Praetor. This is another in the Praetor series. Like I said earlier, they're all kind of really mean cards. Each kind of does something in their own color. Like, Jin-Gitaxias messes with card advantage. Very blue thing to do. Well, Vorinclex messes with mana. Again, a very green thing to do. All your lands produce an additional mana of whatever color it produced. All your opponent's lands tap and freeze. That's pretty much what he does. So he really slows down your opponent's gameplay while accelerating yours. And he has Trample. So, I mean, a 7/6 Trampler is definitely, I mean, even without the rest of it, you know, the mana doubling or the mana freezing, even just Trample, 8 mana for a 7/6 is not bad at all. Still playable. Throw in the other 2 things, and I think he's undercosted, but hey. This is Commander, you know, pretty much anything goes. Alright, moving on to the next category, Enchantments. Let's start with As Foretold. 2 and a blue for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a time counter on it. At once each turn, now, again, very careful phrasing right there, each turn, not just on each of your turns, you may pay 0 rather than pay the mana cost for a spell you cast with converted mana cost X or less, or X the number of time counters on it. This seems like a rather bulky way to word this. I think they could have just phrased it, once each turn you may cast a card with CMC X or less for X number of time counters on it, without paying its mana cost. But I'm sure there's a reason they phrased it like that, I guess. I don't know, maybe it'll come up in Hour of Devastation, we'll see. Essentially, it's just another way to start, as I call it, freecasting stuff. So you're getting Rashmi triggers to help you freecast stuff. This is just one more way to do it. Because you get this out early. Oh. I just realized, just spell you cast, not from your hand. So you actually use this to cast your commander, if need be. So let's say Rashmi's died a couple times. You know, she's up to an 8-drop. Well, if you have 8 counters on As Foretold, you can cast her for free. So that's early game, you know, depending on your deck build, it's okay. The longer it stays on the board, the more dangerous it gets. So it's just something else, like maybe draw focus away from a creature you have, and something kind of draw focus to that, or another way to cheat stuff into play. It's just, I think it's very well not well balanced, but a well-usable card. Continuing on to Asceticism, 3 double green. Creatures you control can't be the targets of spells or abilities your opponents control, and then you can pay 1 of the green to regenerate target creature. So you can kind of use that activated ability as kind of maybe a political move. If you need to chump block stuff, you can keep stuff alive. If someone wraths, you can use that as long as they can be regenerated. And it gives all your stuff hexproof. So that's a really powerful mechanic in Commander, because it forces them to rely on basically board wipe type effects to get rid of your creatures or do anything to your creatures. So for 5 mana, it's definitely worth it. If you have Rashmi on the board, it's a 5 mana, trigger. Definitely worth it. The regenerate, people like to hate on Rashmi, it keeps her alive. Bear Umbra is 2 and double green for an Aura enchantment. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2, and whenever it attacks, untap all lands you control. Now, I threw this in here for primarily 2 reasons. First off is, gives an enchanted creature +2/+2. Or not, no, sorry. Totem Armor. Forgot to mention that. So Totem Armor is essentially regenerate on a stick. If the enchanted creature will be destroyed, destroy the Umbra instead. So it's just another way of keeping your stuff around, making you survive a little longer. And tack onto that, whenever that creature swings, you untap all lands you control. Even if you only get 1 swing out of it, you just double the amount of mana you could use that turn, effectively. So how you use that's up to you. It's just, I think it's ridiculous. For 4 mana, you get to untap all your lands, and then with Seedborn, 5 mana, just Jesus. Stuff gets out of hand quick. Future Sight, 2 triple blue. It's the enchantment version of Magus of the Future, or Magus is the creature version of this. However you want to go about it. Just a good way to help play more cards out of your library, help hit land drops, or if you're getting kind of land flooded, it's a way to help get around that, because instead of you draw a land, lands on top, play the land on top. Don't play one from your hand, because you already know you're going to draw another one, so you may as well play that land on top, and hopefully reveal a spell you can cast. Leyline of Anticipation, 2 double blue. Essentially, it's Vedalken Orrery. Lets you play stuff from your hand. It's not even from your hand, just lets you cast non-land cards so they have flash. And the thing about ley lines is if it's in your opening hand, so you draw your first 7 cards, you look at it, ley lines in there, and you keep that opening hand, boom, ley lines on the battlefield. You start with it in play. So that, you can't really argue with that. It's pretty good. In a commander game, yeah, the odds of getting it are pretty low. At least that ley line type ability to where you just drop it turn 0. But even 4 mana for it, double blue, oh no, I'm running green in here. I can ramp all day. So I still think it's pretty good. Mind Unbound, 4 double blue. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a lore counter on it, then draw a card for each lore counter. Drawing lots of cards. Like, lots and lots of cards. The longer this sticks around, the more cards you draw, and as long as you have ways to cast them, it starts off rather slow. You draw 1, 2, 3, but as soon as you start drawing like 4 or more, you should have an answer for just about anything your opponents could do. And at that point, you didn't even really care about discard type effects, maybe. But drawing lots of cards, what I think here. Mind's Dilation is 5 and double blue. Whenever an opponent casts into her first spell, they exile the top card of their library. If it's on land, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. So this here has, I guess, double type utility. First off, you're casting, whenever your opponent casts a spell, or their first spell each turn, exile the top card of the library. If you like what it is, cast it. If you don't like what it is, or you don't want your opponent to be able to use that, or ever recur it, don't cast it, and it stays exiled. Additional effect, Rashmi, this is an additional trigger. They cast their first spell, you also get to cast a spell on the stack on top of it, and then Rashmi goes on top of that, giving you a second spell. So it just kind of snowballs from there. Insanely powerful enchantment, draws a lot of hate. I like it a lot. So this is probably the most hateful card in this deck. Omniscience is 7 and 3 blue. You may cast non-land cards from your hand without paying their mana costs. Now, the may part is what really puts this in overdrive. Because your X spells, you can still choose to pay the mana cost for those, therefore having a value for X besides 0. But for everything else, yeah, I'm just going to pay 0 to drop all this stuff. And the only downside is it doesn't work out of your library. So you can't, Magus of the Future, your entire deck out of the battlefield. But at this point, you're drawing enough cards, with 10 mana, you really don't care. just drawing a lot of cards, playing a lot of stuff for free, just doing whatever you want to do. Insanely powerful. I actually have another version of this deck, which maybe I'll do in my next episode or a future episode, where I made this deck more fair. So obviously Omniscience is going to go away because it's a very unfair card. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. Ristic Study is 2 and a blue. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may draw a card unless that player pays 1. You could also read this as spells your opponents control cost 1 more to cast. Usually, depending on the play group or how early it is in the game, people just let you draw those cards. Which really come back to bite people, because the more cards you're drawing, the more answers you're going to have in your hand, the better you're able to get out what you want to get out. And it's making them eat up mana if they don't want you to draw those cards. So, it's for 3 mana, it's ridiculous. Like, and it was a common when it was first printed. It's insane. Then the card Resurgent, 5, double green. Whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana to your mana pool of any type that land produced. So if you tap an island, you get an extra blue mana. You tap a forest, you get an extra green mana. If you tap a double land, like for example, Gruul Turf, which you tap to add red-green, you choose if you want to add a red or a green. Because it's any type that land produced, not produces. So it has to be the type that you put out with it. So a dual land, like let's say Plateau, produces white or red. If you produce white, you get white. You produce red, you get red. Added benefit, whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. That is really rare in green, and it's really powerful, especially in green, because green has a lot of creatures. In here, it's mostly for the additional mana ramp. I only have like 15 creatures, 16 if you include the commander. But it's another way to draw cards. I mean, pure and simple. Drawing cards, more mana, makes me a happy planeswalker. Alright, next category is instant spells. Appetite for the Unnatural is 2 and a green. Destroy target artifact or enchantment, you gain 2 life. It's spot removal. That's essentially all it is. Spot removal, gain some life. Pretty simple. Beast Within, 2 and a green. Destroy target permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green beast creature token. Now, obviously, you're not going to blow up, their 1/1, vanilla 1/1 with this. Because, A, you're spending 3 mana to kill, like a 1-drop or a 2-drop. And you're going to replace it with something bigger. So you use this on their bigger costed stuff. Either, a creature that gets a bunch of 1/1 counters getting out of hand, or if you don't like a certain enchantment they have, or, whatever, it says target permanent. That also applies to lands. Lands are permanents. So let's say your opponent plays Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale, which I highly doubt you'll ever see, but hypothetically, let's say they play that. Well, nobody likes paying extra mana to keep their creatures in play, so Beast Within, it's gone, they get a 3/3. So it's all about what you're willing to, basically how low you're willing to drop the bar to kill something. Bluestone Zenith, X, 3 blue. Target player draws X cards. Shuffle Bluestone Zenith into its owner's library. All the Zeniths have that ability tacked onto their resolution, shuffle back into its owner's library. And they each do things that are pretty, iconic with their color. Bluestone Zenith, you draw. And it scales fairly well. I mean, that triple blue keeps you from being too handy early game. Like, you're not going to spend 4 mana to draw 1 card. Nobody does that. But later game, when you have, 5, 6, 7 mana, and this is a pretty good use for it. Sinking it in for, X's 3, 4, 5. It scales really well with a commander game. And it's at instant speed, so you can do it at the end of the person who goes prior to you. You can do it at the end of their turn. And at your turn, you untap, and you have all this land and all these cards in your hand. It's just a really powerful card. Then it goes back in your library. So you're putting cards back in your library, and you can use it again and again and again, depending on how often you pull it. Just insane. Cancel, 1 double blue, counter target spell. I'm running blue. I'm going to counter stuff. I want to keep my stuff around. Gives you a little political value. If you're running blue and you're not running counter spells, I'm actually kind of curious as to what your archetype is. Because who doesn't like counter spells? Even like 2 or 3. I mean, because there's going to be something out there you're going to want to counter that you don't really have the means to deal with when it's on the board. And if the other players don't, well, it's going to stick around. It's going to get dangerous. So counter spells are essentially universal spot removal, because you're removing that spot before it even happens. Now 2 and a blue for another counterspell, with the caveat that the spell controller can pay 4 to let it resolve. So later game you got to time this well, but early game it's really handy because people are going to tap out more often or not have 4 extra mana to spend on this, or not want to spend the 4 mana. So in addition to helping you, spot remove, if they hold on to that 4 extra mana, it kind of gives you an idea that they have something else coming up this turn or during somebody else's turn that could be something to look out for. Counterspell, the original counterspell. Double blue, counter target spell. Just 2 mana, nope, not happening. Because if you're running counterspell, this is going to be the one to run. Cyclonic Rift, 1 in the blue, return target non-land permanent you don't control to owner's hand. Overload for 6 in a blue. I really like the overload mechanic because it takes these low-costed instants and sorceries, and you pay a little bit more mana, and all of a sudden, it's hitting a lot of stuff. Cyclonic Rift is probably one of the best board wipes aside from like Descend Upon the Sinful or Austere Command. Because Wrath of God can't touch indestructible stuff. It's only done at sorcery speed. Same with Damnation. Cyclonic Rift just return all non-land permanents you don't control. Do it at the end of somebody's turn, and now they have to discard a lot of the stuff they just put back in their hand. And this gets rid of tokens, it gets rid of enchantments. Just if it's not a land, it's going back to the hand. For 7 mana at instant speed. Just craziness. I'm pretty sure every blue deck I've ever played or played against has had this card in it. It scales really well, and it's targeted spot removal early game, or if you need it and you don't want to overload it because you don't want to draw hate or whatever. It overloads. It's dumb. Take your time. 6 double blue for a Delve instant. So for Delve, essentially, you can exile cards from your graveyard to pay for the generic mana cost. So like how this is 6 and double blue, you can exile up to 6 cards from your graveyard to pay up to 6 less. You still got to pay the double blue, though, which is... it's meh. I mean, look at the top 7 cards of your library. Pick 2, put them in your hand, put the rest on bottom. What? Late game, doing that for 2 mana is... it's dumb. It's really dumb. But it's also a completely legal thing. So, I mean, it scales insanely well with the game. Yeah, you gotta exile stuff, but like this deck, if you notice, I don't have a whole lot of grave recursion. In fact, I have none. So once it's in the yard, perfect fuel for my Delve triggers. And if I don't, well, I'll just cast it when I have enough mana. Insane. And you get to pick which 2. You pick, and then you put the rest back. Your opponents don't even get to see them. So you can kind of sneak up on people with stuff like that. Disallow 1 double blue, counter target spell or ability. I really like this one. As soon as I was at the Aether Revolt pre-release, and somebody played this against me, and for the rest of that match, all I could think was, I'm going to trade this guy for that disallow. Counter whatever. That's all. That's what it should say. Is counter whatever. Insane versatility for 3 mana. Counter target spell is good, or I should say average. But counter whatever you want at instant speed for 3 mana. Why not? Like seriously, why not? Dissipate 1 double blue counter target spell. If it's countered this way, exile it. So this is a really good way to make sure that your opponent can't bring back that super annoying thing. It's also handy to use against stuff that doesn't mind being in the yard. Like, for example, the Eldrazi Titans. Let's take Ulamog, for example. Actually, any of the 3. They all have, whenever it's put into the graveyard from anywhere, shuffle it and the graveyard into its owner's library. So if you counter Ulamog with this, yeah, they're still going to get the when cast trigger, but you're exiling their Ulamog. They don't get them back. I'd say it's worth it, depending on what they blow up. But yeah, it's very good. Just keep stuff from coming back that you don't want to come back. Dissolve 1 double blue. Counter target spell, scry 1. Scrying is really good. the more you scry, the more you can basically fix the game. It's kind of like a legal form of cheating. Like if you scry enough, yeah, theoretically, if you scry enough, you could set the game up so that way you just draw everything you need and you win. So I like scrying. Force of Will. 3 double blue. You may pay 1 life and remove a blue card in your hand from the game instead of paying for Force of Will's mana cost. Counter target spell. So it's kind of a sneaky thing. You tap out to cast that big spell. Your opponent thinks they're going to be all sly and, cast something while you're tapped out because they think you can't counter it. Okay, I'm just going to exile, this cheat card I don't really need. Like, let's say I'll exile cancel because it's not really helpful. Because all your stuff's uncounterable or whatever. I'm just going to exile a blue card from my hand, pay a life, which you start with 40, so who cares? And I'm going to counter that, and yeah, good luck. Like, that just happened. Really handy to have. Insidious Will is a modal counterspell. 2 double blue, you can counter a spell, you can basically redirect it, or you can get your own copy. So if someone's targeting an opponent with a spell you really like, you can copy it and use it for yourself. If someone's targeting you with something you don't like, you can redirect it. Or you can just say, no, not happening. So really versatile. For 4 mana, it's not bad. I mean, this is Commander. You're going to be able to cast it at some point. Just really, really good counterspell. Crimson Grip. 2 and a green. Destroy target artifact or enchantment with split second. So it's spot removal, target spot removal, with split second. So unless they have a triggered ability that would trigger on this going on the stack, nothing happens after this. Split second is a really powerful mechanic. It essentially says, unless it's triggered, nothing's happening until I resolve. So it makes it so your opponents can't flash, give their artifact or enchantment flash hexproof. It makes it really hard to counter this. It's just really powerful for 3 mana. Pact Negation 0, counter target spell. At the beginning of your next upkeep, pay 3 double blue. If you don't, you lose the game. So you have to be really careful with this, because if you don't have enough mana at the beginning of your next upkeep to pay for it, or if your opponent taps and freezes your lands before it's your turn, you just got to be really careful. It's great when you're tapped out and you don't want your opponent to do something really messed up. We just got to be really careful with it. Civic Charm is another modal instance. Green-blue, choose one. Either you buff one of your creatures to give it +3/+3, give all your stuff hexproof till end of turn, or bounce something at any creature, which is handy. I like modal spells. They're versatile, obviously, and it's just very much a toolbox type thing in colors that don't necessarily have that. And it's the instant speed. Can't really argue with that. Stifle is a single blue, counter target activated triggered ability. Really good mechanic. Actually, you can use this on Force of Will, or Pact of Negation, because Pact of Negation states at the beginning of your next upkeep. That makes it a triggered ability. It triggers at the beginning of your upkeep. You can stifle that. So if you only have one mana open and it's blue, you can stifle Pact and not die. So it's just pretty versatile, and it's very cheaply costed. So for me, it's almost an auto-include. Not quite, but I think it's really good. Summer Dismissal, 2 double blue. Exile all the spells and counter all abilities. Now, the wording in that is very important. You counter abilities. Now, when this resolves, anything on the stack under it just goes away. Straight up. Spells that say can't be countered, go away. Abilities, go away. You gotta be careful with this, though, because if you do it while you have something on the stack that you want to resolve, like let's say you're casting a creature, your opponent goes to counter it, I would not recommend using Summer Dismissal to counter that counterspell, because then you're just going to exile both your creature and that counterspell. So, unless that spell has buyback and you really don't want using it again, just got to bear in mind that everything on the stack under it goes away. Other than that, you should be fine. Trick Bind is a slightly more powerful version of Stifle. It's 1 in the blue. Counter target activated trigger ability. If a permanent ability is countered this way, activated ability of that permanent can't be played this turn. And it has split second. So I already talked about split second, very powerful mechanic. Basically what this guy does is he freezes an activated ability. So let's say your opponent, let's use Mina and Den Wildborn, for example. So Mina and Den, red-green, return a land you control to your opponent's hand. Target creature gains trample until end of turn. So if you trick bind that ability, it's countered, and because of the activated ability, they can't use it again till end of, for the rest of that turn. So it really helps stop annoying stuff like burn type effects from hitting you hard, or at least for that turn. So it helps buy time. If someone has like an ETB that's stupid, you can use it on that. Void Shatter, 1 double blue. Very similar to Dissipate in that it exiles the spell. The only difference being that Void Shatter is devoid. So although it has blue in its mana cost, it's treated as colorless. Obviously, the color identity is still blue because that's separate from color. But still, it's another counter spell. It's another way to exile stuff I don't like. Let's move on to sorceries. First one being Beacon of Tomorrows. 6 double blue. Target player takes an extra turn. Shuffle it into its owner's library. So all the beacons do that. You use it, it resolves, it goes back to your library. Taking extra turns, I already talked about that. Kind of a broken thing to do, especially when you can recur it like this. Yeah, it's 8 mana, so you're not really going to cast it till the mid to late game. But I mean, extra turns are worth it. Especially if you tap out to play this, you get an extra turn, so you get to draw a card. So essentially, you cast it for free and draw a card. Is one way of looking at it. And as you get more stuff on the board and more spells and more mana, it can just snowball. Boundless Realms is 6 and a green. Search your library for up to X basic lands, where X the number of lands you control. Put them on the battlefield tapped. Notice how it says lands you control, not basic lands you control. You fetch a basic for each land you control. So let's say I control 1 forest and 6 non-basics. I'm getting 7 lands. And it just scales really well. The more lands you get, the more powerful it becomes. I primarily use this to just draw all the lands out of my deck. Thin it out, meaning I try to leave as few lands in there. So for those Rashmi triggers, I'm hitting more and more spells that I can cast. And it ramps. Just explosive. Caravan Vigilance in greens. Go get a basic land, put it in your hand. It also has Morbid. So if a creature died, any creature died, whether, just a token, they sacked it, or whatever. If any creature died, you get to throw that land onto the battlefield, untapped. So, I mean, you swing, you can swing with like a 1/1, just see if your opponent will block it and kill it. They do that, main 2, Caravan Vigil, I get a land for free. So, it scales, I mean, not really scales, but it's very handy to use. Explosive Vegetation, 3 green, search library for 2 basic lands, put them on the battlefield tapped. Again, mana ramp. Green likes ramp, blue likes ramp, this deck likes ramp. Get Probe, Phyrexian blue, look at target player's hand, draw a card. So Phyrexian blue means it can be paid with either 1 blue mana or 2 life. Makes it really handy. So let's say you start the game, you can throw out a forest at first if you want to cast like Birds of Paradise or something, and still be able to cast Get Probe. See what a particular opponent has in their hand. See what you have to look out for. And you can draw a card, so it replaces itself. Just another way to thin the deck slightly. This is Renewal, 5 and a green. Go get 3 basics, put them on the battlefield tapped, gain 7 life. That's just good value right there. 6 mana for 3 lands is already, pretty decent. And then gain 7 life. This was a card that was definitely designed for Standard and not Commander, because that's kind of silly. This is Revelation. 5 double green, scry 5, reveal the top card. If it's a creature, you draw how many cards are equal to its power, then you gain life equal to its toughness. So it's a good way to chuck away cards on top. Like if you hit a land pocket, you can throw all those lands on bottom. If you hit a creature pocket and you need lands, you can throw all those creatures away. I don't know why you would. If there's a big, you can also help figure out how many cards you want to draw, depending on the creatures that are on top of your library. So if you only want to draw like 2 or 3 cards, and the top of your library has Foreign Collects and Magus of the Future, you can choose to put Magus on top. Like I said, you can also chuck all 5 of them to the bottom of the library and just see what the Heart of the Cards gives you. So it has some good utility. It's also a 7-drop, so that's a good Rashmi trigger. Ponder to a single blue, look at the top 3 cards, put them back in any order. You can shuffle if you want, and then you draw. So look at the top 3. Oh, I really like this one. I'm going to put that on top. I'm going to draw it. Or, ooh, these 3 all suck. I'm going to shuffle my library and hopefully get something better. So turn 1, that's pretty good value right there. Rampant Growth, 1 of the green. Go get a basic land, put it in tapped. Ramp, that's all it is. Turn 2 ramp. Or later. Just get those lands out of the way. Ranger's Path, go grab 2 basic, or go grab 2 forests. So this can grab non-basics as long as it has that forest subtype. Throw them out tapped, and shuffle your library. Ramp, that's all it is ramp. Triple Silver Walled. Further ramp. 1 of the green, search for a basic land, put it in your hand. However, if you have 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, card types being, like creature, enchantment, sorcery, instant, planeswalker, land. If you have 4 or more of those types, you can instead search for a creature or land, reveal it, put it in your hand. Essentially, if you have Delirium, it's Sylvan Tutor. Which is, Sylvan Tutor by itself is pretty good. So, anything that can copy that is, yes. Treasure Cruise, 7 of the blue to draw 3 cards with Delve. Bargain over Delve. So drawing 3 cards for a single blue is insane. That's why this thing was banned in Standard. It's also banned in Modern. That should tell you how stupid it is. Unexpected results. 2 green-blue. So I like this for that first part, shuffle your library. So if I have cards on top that I can't or don't want to play, shuffle it up. Then reveal the top card. With the land, throw it on the battlefield. Put results back in your hand. With the non-land, you can cast it for free. What? Just absolute insanity. It can help you ramp slowly, but you get to keep using it over and over again. Basically, it just says, cast it however many times you want until you hit a non-land. As long as you have the mana for it. And that non-land, you gotta be... it's luck of the draw. That's why it's unexpected results. You could pay 4 mana for a Birds of Paradise, or you could pay 4 mana for an Omniscience. It's all really luck of the draw, heart of the card type stuff. I have it in there because, A, it helps draw out lands, and just the possibility of a turn 2 Omniscience is too good to pass up. I only have 1 Planeswalker in this deck. It is Tamiyo Moonsage. 3 double blue for a 4 loyalty Planeswalker. +1, tap and freeze a permanent and opponent controls. Target permanent. Handy. Helps protect yourself a little bit. Mostly it's just about plus her up until I can alter. Yeah, you're not supposed to use Planeswalkers for their ults, but hers is just too darn good to pass up. -2, draw a card for each tap creature your opponent controls. So if somebody swings all out, ooh, cool, here's Tamiyo, -2, I'm going to draw a crap load of cards. Really kind of stupid. And then her, -8, you get an emblem that has 2 abilities. First is you have no max hand size, which, unremovable, no max hand size. There's nothing in the game that can get rid of emblems. Well, there's only 1 card. But, emblems are pretty much permanent. And then whatever card we put into your graveyard from anywhere, you may return it to your hand instead. So, just insanity. You can keep recurring and recurring every single one of those cards, and you don't have to worry as much about chump blocking because it's going to go right back to your hand. So, someone board wipes, it all goes back to your hand. So it's a really powerful thing right there, which is why it takes 5 turns to get to it. Which is, I like it. On the rare occasions I've gotten it, I've won the game. Alright, let's move on to lands. As far as basics, I have 27 basics, 13 forests, and 14 islands. I don't like to go too wide with my non-basics, especially in a 2-color deck. But you gotta have them. You gotta have basics. No deck is not gonna have basics. Even my 5-color decks all have basics. As far as non-basics, first one is Botanical Sanctum. It's a fast land, which means if you have 2 or fewer lands, it comes in untapped. and it can tap for green or blue. So help with that color fixing. Breeding Pool's a shock land, which means when it enters the battlefield, you may pay 2 life. If you don't, it enters tapped. The wording on that is very important, because instead of saying if you do, it enters untapped, it enters tapped if you don't. However, you got to be careful with that. Like, let's say you Ranger's Path, right? You grab Breeding Pool because it has the forest subtype. It's going to come in tapped regardless. So you can pay that 2 life, but it's still going to enter tapped. So you just got to look out for that. Hinterland Harbor is a what's called Buddy Lands. Enters tapped unless you control an island or a forest. So as long as you get, how Breeding Pool is a forest and an island. It doesn't say basic forest or island, it just says forest or an island. So as long as you control a land with at least one of those basic land types, it comes in untapped. It's just a way to color fix. Misty Rainforest. Fetch land. Tap it, pay a life, sack it, go get a forest or island card. Not basic, just forest or island. Throw it on the battlefield. Stuff your library. Again, coming back to Breeding Pool, it's as it enters trigger, or it's as it enters ability is still going to happen. So you still have to pay those at 2 life unless you want if you want it to come in untapped. Reliquary Tower, you can tap it to add a generic mana to your mana pool, but it also gives no max hand size. That's the sole reason it's in here. If it didn't give no max hand size, if it was just tap, add a colorless mana to your mana pool, I wouldn't have it. I want that no max hand size. Civic Growth Chamber enters tapped. When it enters, bounce a land you control. Which means if this is the first land you play, that's the only land you control, so you have to bounce it. But on the plus side, you can tap it for green-blue. Not green or blue, green-blue. So you get 2 mana when you tap it. So it's good to get this out early, like turn 2 or so. Especially if you can't play anything else. So drop a land. Next turn, nothing to cast for 1 mana or 2 mana. Drop Civic Growth Chamber, bounce the other land back to your hand. Then on turn 3, you're going in with 3 mana and only 2 lands. So it kind of helps ramp a little bit. I just figured why not. And then lastly, I have Tropical Island. You're probably not going to have this. It's a rather expensive card, but you can just as easily replace that with like Simic Guildgate. The fact that a lot of the non-basics enter tapped isn't that big of a deal in Commander. I just personally don't like tap lands, which is why I'm willing to spend the money to get these original duels. But that's just how I feel. That's the deck list for this thing. Let's move on to interactions next. So now we're going to talk about some of the interactions that go on in this deck. And I've already mentioned a few, such as the Hallmark Archive let me draw more cards than I should be able to. Azami, tapping on my wizard to help me draw cards. So the primary win condition in this deck, what I originally built it for, is Laboratory Maniac. And as you can see, there's a lot of draw power in this deck, and that's really what it's designed to do, is through drawing and casting cards from my library and pulling cards from my library into my hand, just empty it out as quickly as possible, get Lab Maniac on the board, and then do some kind of draw type effect, or do it at the end of somebody's turn, and then on my turn for my draw step, there's nothing left, so I win. Another win condition in here is Psychosis Crawler. Because I'm drawing a lot of cards, I can slowly whittle everyone at the board down. So every time I draw, everyone at the table, minus me, loses 1 life. So if I'm drawing, 10, 12 cards, then they're losing 10, 12 life, or whatever it happens to be. And I can work it so that if he stays on the board long enough and I have enough draw power, I can just take away everyone's last little bit of life. To my knowledge, there's nothing that prevents loss of life. There's stuff that prevents damage. So without removing him, he gets to be a threat pretty quickly, and he catches a lot of hate for that. I have the Praetors in there, Jinkataxius, and Vorinclex, because they really just speed up what I do and slow down what everyone else does. So it makes it harder for people to react to what I do. Like I said, this is not a fair deck. So I don't play it that often because it's usually not fun for other people, and that's why I play Commanders, because I find it to be fun. So this is typically the deck that I whip out when someone else has got their degraded combo deck or their, what have you. and people are, or namely me, just getting tired of it, and I want to eke out a win. So another interaction I have is Sakashima. Now, since it can enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature and keeps its name, I can have it be a copy of both my or my opponent's legendaries. So if you happen to have something out that I like more than what I have on the board, boom, there you go. I now have one myself. Lighthouse Chronologist also interacts with that. Lighthouse, Sakashima, and Altered Ego, they can all become copies of Lighthouse Chronologist. And they retain that level up ability and those triggers with the level ups. So if I pull out Sakashima and Altered Ego, make them both copies of Lighthouse Chronologist, max out the level on all three of them, at the end of each person's end step, or rather at the beginning of each person's end step, all three will trigger because it's not my end step and I will get 3 additional turns. That's pretty mean, and I've only done it once because it was actually a rather large game, so I was able to get away with quite a bit. And it just got out of hand. Like I just sat there doing 3-4 turns in a row, and everyone else kind of pulled out their phones and stopped having fun. So there's that. If need be, I can do combat. Like I have some stuff in there to where I can just swing out at one person if I need to, or I can kind of political my way into getting everyone else to beat each other up. So it's not really a combat-based deck. So if Psychosis Crawler or Lab Maniac can't do it for me, then I'm kind of hosed, because I don't really have any other way of pulling out a win. So with that, you have to go with that in mind. This deck catches a lot of hate. Either you start ramping mana early and you start using Rashmi early, or it just falters. The biggest weakness is the commander. If you're playing against combinations with red or black, even white to an extent, they'll just hate on Rashmi, exile her, destroy her, burn her out with stuff like Lightning Bolt and Blaze, and just keep you from doing what you want to do, which is kind of in the best interest of the board, because of, again, how degraded this deck can get. It makes it just very difficult to do anything else that you want to do. And because a lot of the instant sorceries, or it's very instant sorcery heavy, I have 20 instants, and I have 13 sorceries. So if you get Talrand out soon enough, then you're just pumping out a bunch of 2/2 flyers that just come in and eat everyone's face off. So it does have minimal outside of those two conditions to come out and win. And you kind of try to keep everyone else at bay with counterspells. So that's pretty much the extent of what this deck does. I have a few other commander decks that I want to, do videos on and talk about. And I recently got back into Standard, so I can talk about that. I want to know what you guys think. So in the comments, go ahead, talk about cards that you would use instead, why you would use them. Maybe it's a card that I've never heard of. I mean, I'm still learning a lot of these. I go on Gatherer, and I have a couple apps that I look up, and I just look up random keywords, and there are times where it's like, that's pretty freaking good. I need to use that. I'd also like to hear your guys' ideas on deck building challenges, like colors and archetypes, like, try building Naya tokens, or, try doing mono black control, if that's even a thing. Or if you want to give me, just a gimmick or a theme to build around. I'll see what I can do and, hopefully have it in time for you guys completely lose interest. So, just give me your comments, and we'll see if this becomes a thing. May the odds be ever in your favor, and good luck.